Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. So my name is Karen Sudu. I am the Executive Director of ADEPT, the Africa-Europe Diaspora Development Platform. So it's a pleasure to welcome you to the second webinar of the 3 webinar series on diaspora humanitarianism that is jointly organized by IOM, Shabaka, and ADEPT. So in line with our willingness to shed light on the actions conducted by some overlooked humanitarian actors, namely diaspora networks, groups, and individuals. So this webinar that is entitled Diaspora Transnational Humanitarianism, Transnational Responses Developed by Diaspora Communities. So this webinar will explore diaspora humanitarian engagement in 3rd countries, while diaspora engagement in humanitarianism is often analyzed through the lens of the humanitarian support provided by diasporas in origin and or residence countries. We think that it's, for many reasons, critical to put to the fore and to discuss responses that transcend the borders of these countries. And why is it so critical? First of all, because while diaspora motivation may be the same, may remain the same, the consequences and the implications of intervening in 3rd countries need to be precisely certain in terms of planning, for example, in terms of coordination, in terms of implementation on the ground, more largely speaking, to name a few. Secondly, because it's actually not an unusual phenomenon. In the framework of this webinar, we will focus on 3 specific cases: Syria, Lebanon, and Venezuela. However, recent and less recent examples of diaspora engagement in 3rd countries abound. We can, of course, mention the crises in Haiti, in the Central African Republic, in Myanmar, which led Haitians, Central Africans, and of course, Rohingyas to flee to neighboring countries, which in turn spurred humanitarian responses from the diaspora. And the 3rd reason is that it's also important to foresee. It's important to be able to anticipate. And here I am alluding to the consequences of climate change. Even though the majority of mobility in the context of climate change takes place within the border of countries, some people already move abroad. They are forced to move abroad because of climate change. And this phenomenon is bound to amplify, to accelerate if climate change mitigation and adaptation measures are not sufficient, which will most probably bring about reaction from the diasporas to provide assistance in 3rd countries. And for all these reasons, we think that it's very important to talk about this issue. And of course, we look forward to the discussion that will ensue. So just for you to have more clarity about the agenda, there will be a presentation from the Syrian American Medical Society. that will be ensued by another presentation by IOM in Lebanon, and another one from the Venezuelan diaspora. There will be some intervention from the audience, because it's always very important to have more clarity about the experiences. And here it will be from Healing Venezuela. And after that, there will be a Q&A and an open discussion. And it will be closed by some closing remarks. Over.
Thank you so much, Corinne. Hi, my name is Tohid. I hope you can hear me okay. I'm the head of agency for IOM, International Organization for Migration in the UK, based in London. And this is the second of a series of 3 webinars that we are hosting. The first webinar took place in the middle of October, and that discussed the key alliances that were required in the humanitarian sector to really facilitate diaspora engagement. And these 3 webinars are really concentrating on how diaspora contribute to responding to humanitarian crisis, and how we can, as stakeholders, contribute to that effort. And that's why it's been so important to bring together the diaspora actors. And in that first webinar that we held, we really talked about the importance of including diaspora as they are crucial actors on the ground and are present before and after institutional actors such as ourselves have come and gone. My colleague from IOM DC, Washington DC, Roberta, she introduced a framework for diaspora engagement in humanitarian assistance that's being developed in partnership with the Haitian Renewal Alliance. And really, we talked about a stakeholder approach, a multi-stakeholder approach in which diaspora recognizes key actors. And today, what we really want to focus on, and Corinne, you touched on this already, is the work that diaspora humanitarianism is bringing in terms of responding to crises in 3rd countries, which are not necessarily those countries where diasporas are from. So not just their countries of origin and not the countries that they're settled in. And we really want to explore how diaspora have engaged a broader interest and a focus in engaging in other countries. And I think that we have some colleagues online, and it'll be really interesting to hear from them as well in the audience on how they've set up NGOs and charities that are focusing not just on work in their countries of origin, but at a broader level as well across other humanitarian spaces globally. And this webinar will hopefully bring that different perspective. And then another aspect that we want to explore today is the role of diaspora communities and NGOs in amplifying the work that is already being done by other NGOs, many of them who are diaspora NGOs. And how are diaspora contributing to that effort more generally? How are they assisting and delivering that support? And then we're going to focus, as Corinne has said, on some very specific instances, and we're going to be hearing from our colleagues. And it'll be good to hear today about some of the examples of diaspora-led initiatives or campaigns that are being conducted across different countries multinationally. And often we'll find that a crisis, a humanitarian crisis, it spreads across borders. And Corinne, you mentioned climate change as an ideal example. And of course, we're seeing that with the Venezuelan refugee crisis as well, going across different countries and how communities are responding to this. So it's going to be very interesting to hear from our colleagues. And without me saying much more, I'd like to hand over to Paul from Shabaka, who is going to be moderating today's discussion. Thank you very much. And just to say, sorry, Corinne, if you may have mentioned this, but we do have interpretation going across in French, Spanish, and Arabic. You click on the button at the bottom of your screen, and that will take you to the relevant interpreter. Thank you.
Thank you, Tahid, and thank you, Karina, as well, for your introduction. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Paul Asquith. I'm Research and Advocacy Manager at Shabaka, which is a UK-based diaspora organisation specialising in diaspora humanitarian response, and we do a lot of research and advocacy around this. I'm very honoured that you're able to join us today for our fantastic panel discussion on this very important topic that hopefully seeks to deepen our understanding of how the diaspora respond to humanitarian crises, not just in origin or settlement countries, but in other countries as well. With no further ado, let me introduce our first panelist to you, who will be Dr. Meher Azzouz from the Syrian American Medical Society. Dr. Azzouz has belonged to this since the early 2000s and has held multiple leadership positions, including being a member of the SAMS National Board of Directors, the president of SAMS Ohio chapter, a trustee of SAMS UK, and the chair of SAMS Foundation. And Dr. Azzouz, during his time, has initiated and served on multiple committees with regard to advocacy, mental health, education, and scientific conferences. And he's been very active in SAMS in Jordan and Iraq committees and has led medical missions to these countries. Dr. Azzouz represents SAMS at international functions and has been instrumental in organizing their national and international conferences addressing medical relief and education, as well as the diaspora's role in response to these crises. So with no further ado, the floor is yours, Dr. Azzouz. Very much looking forward to hearing what you have to say on this interesting topic. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank IOM, Shabaka, and ADEPT for allowing us to participate in this very important symposium. Next slide, please. I had purposefully decided to include our map of function in 2018 and 2019 as opposed to currently, because I wanted to make the distinction between diaspora work before COVID and after COVID. I think if COVID had done anything, it even further highlighted the importance of the diaspora in medical relief work, humanitarian work, when it comes to refugees, especially with the restrictions imposed by COVID. And if our word after COVID is not different, then we have failed. And that's maybe like my first and most important message. Just a quick background on SAMS. SAMS is a medical relief organization currently, but it started as a professional society representing American physicians from Syrian descent in order to initially to transform some of the knowledge to our host home country where we came from. So we used to conduct business and conferences and try to transfer our knowledge to the communities where we came from. But in 2011, with the crisis in Syria, the organization was transformed completely into a medical relief organization, into an NGO that is an international NGO registered in multiple countries. And that's my first point about the role of the diaspora. This work could not have been done without the diaspora. The initial work of SAMS, the building blocks of SAMS, the transformation of SAMS happened by members, by the diaspora. Time, money, effort, education, skills. Down the road, once that infrastructure was put in, then we're able to build the current structure that we have, which is this international NGO that relies heavily on our staff, that's professional staff, that does medical relief, but still the diaspora, the members' involvement is what distinguishes organizations like SAMS from just other medical relief organizations. SAMS has about 1,600 members. As you can imagine, those members carry economic power, either direct or through access in the communities where they work, mainly in the West. They carry knowledge, which can facilitate transfer of knowledge to refugees and try to bridge gaps of knowledge and break barriers, as I'm going to allude to. And then it allows for the direct contact with migrants that you know them in order to be able to utilize them within the NGO work so that they are beneficial to their communities and beneficial to the host communities. As you can see, SAMS is present in Greece, in Turkey, in Jordan, in Bangladesh, in Lebanon, in addition to obviously the majority of our work is in Syria. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick impact just to show you that SAMS in 2018, for example, we have been able to maintain this, have provided 3 million services. The majority obviously are inside Syria, but our services vary between medical relief, between education, participating in vaccination campaigns, public education, supporting civil society. Next slide, please. So as an example, if we look at our work in Jordan, as an example, and the same thing happens in Lebanon, the same thing happens in Greece. We do conduct medical missions. We do provide medical services through clinics that are present either in the community or in the refugee camps. We do serve special population that needs special attention, like the dialysis patients, like the kidney transplant patients, some oncology patients. We participate in education, but most importantly is the ability to collaborate with the local authorities so that our work is in a way complementary to the work of the local authorities. And that's an extremely important point. The other important point that I want to make here is where the diaspora is important is in unique services such as mental health, where there are specific behavioral issues, specific language issues, specific cultural issues that will make it very difficult for international NGOs without local expertise and local understanding of the society to be able to participate. And that's where SAMS excels, and we have mental health services in multiple areas. Next slide, please. Next. The areas where SAMS can, or where the diaspora can participate, probably the most important is education. Maintaining the human capacity when it comes to migrants who are disconnected from their societies, who are disconnected from their education and from their practice, maintaining their education so that the communities after the conflict still has human capacity. And I'm mainly talking about medical here as this is our expertise, but this also applies to all other aspects of society, including engineering, law, all other aspects of society. One of the major restrictions and or limitations that face migrants in host countries are the regulations for whether the NGOs to participate or the regulations for the migrants to be able to adapt, to be able to apply for their qualifying exams. And that's where the diaspora can assist, either through local diaspora in the host countries or overseas diaspora in other countries, where assistance can be financially, can be through direct assistance with passing exams, with providing affidavit of supports and such things. Next, please. But probably the most important area where diaspora kind of shines is in coordinating, collaborating, and connecting within the local communities. For example, connecting with academic institutions, forging partnerships with research institutions. The local societies, the host communities, and the migrants cannot do this, cannot have this access. International communities usually also struggle reaching out for multiple barriers, and that's where the diaspora can be extremely important. And SAMS has multiple examples of being able to do this. We advocate strongly for direct funding for local NGOs. Can be the diaspora can be the voice of local NGOs, can support engaging with local governments so that you can advocate for the migrants, advocate for your cause, and especially advocate for the services. Next slide, please. This is an example of an international conference that SAMS held in collaboration with the University of Jordan and sponsorship from the Ministry of Health, where we got together 18 NGOs that helped talks and workshops for 2 days, trying to align mental health services for the refugees with the host country and the national health plan. Next slide, please. So forming coalitions and advocacy for the local communities, advocacy for the migrants' causes and for the conflict is probably where the diaspora also can have significant impact, because again of the uniqueness of knowing the circumstances on the ground, of knowing exactly where we can function, knowing the people that we function with, and most importantly, advocacy for efficient use of the resources, advocacy for preventing waste, and that's where SAM's probably we are most proud of our ability to deliver services at a much lower cost and show the international community much better ways and much more efficient ways of spending their money. Next slide, please. Now, I'm going to finish by just touching on a few of the limitations. I alluded to the limitation of local regulations and with regards to operating, registering in different countries. You cannot imagine how difficult it is, and I'm sure people who have this experience, how difficult it is to register sometimes in different countries, being able to open bank accounts. So it takes a good while before we can even start working. But one of the major restrictions are banking restrictions, the inability to transfer funds, especially working in conflict zone, working in countries where there are terrorism lists that are included. There are a lot of restrictions, and that significantly impedes the work of SAMS and other international NGOs. The other major limitation is, again, regulations and limitations on maintaining human capacity. Take a physician, take a nurse, take a technician that is a migrant now. The ability to acquire licensing, the ability to be able to work within the host country is very, very difficult. And SAMS participated in multiple international conferences held by RAM as well, trying to standardize this. The other restriction are visa and immigrant status. A lot of times we have members that need to travel that are not citizens of their host countries, and visa limitations have limited significantly the ability of migrants to be able to come and participate and share, and the ability of members to be able to travel. We held a conference one time in Qatar. 3 of our members, of our guests, could not travel because of visa restrictions. Next slide, please. To finish, I think that the international, if we're going to say anything, is that we want to live in one village. The only way to approach this is to be able to approach the migrants in a community sense, where the migrants are an integral part of their communities. And when we address the host communities, we need to address the migrant and the local community the same way, so that services are equal. The international community needs to think of a one globe, of one village, when it comes to regulations, when it comes to standardization, access to maintain human capacity. But banking restrictions, regulation restrictions are probably still the most difficult and the most limiting factor. At the end, what we want is for the migrants to be an asset to their host countries, not a liability, and the international community can use the diaspora significantly in that role, so that these migrants are treated with dignity and respect. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Azzouz, for your inspiring presentation. It was amazing to see the breadth, but also the depth of the activities that SAMS is doing in the region. And I very much liked as well your emphasis both on acknowledging the constraints, but also making recommendations for future action. And I very much agree with your point about the need to support host communities, as well as the refugees that now form part of those communities. Sometimes some people argue that diaspora only help their own extended family, their own kind of kin, when the reality is that we're seeing in a range of different contexts that they're supporting not just their own compatriots, but also the communities that are hosting them, having been displaced. So thank you. With no further ado, let me introduce our next speaker for you, who's going to talk a bit about the Lebanese experience. We're very honored today that Dima Haddad can join us. She's Program Officer for Migrant Protection and Assistance at IOM Lebanon. And she has 18 years of professional experience in the field of counter-trafficking and migrant protection with an extensive protection background. And she is an acknowledged expert based on her daily work with migrants in vulnerable situations and in the management of counter-trafficking and protecting migrants and advocating migrant rights. So with no further ado, I'm going to pass the floor over to you, Dima. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Paul. Again, good morning, good afternoon to colleagues from all over the world. I'm glad to be with you and thank you for extending the invitation to share basically some of the challenges that migrants have been facing, but the opportunities that were also created. So what I'm going to pose and reflect with you over today is three main aspects. One is like to look together on the migrants' presence, their needs and vulnerability, but as well to see how we were trying to support from our side African migrants in Lebanon, and at the end discuss and see how we can further join forces between IOM and the African diaspora. Well, just to give you a quick overview about the migrants' presence in Lebanon, we have approximately 208,000 estimated number of migrants. This was based on an exercise that IOM conducted between October 2020 and June 2021. The majority of migrants are based in Beirut districts. And if we zoom into the migrants from African nationalities, we see that the Ethiopians are really with high percentage presence, 31%, followed by Egyptian and Sudanese. But again, maybe also just to mention that under other nationalities, we have migrants from Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Kenya, Gambia, Liberia, who are also present in Lebanon, but definitely with a lesser number. Well, if we look together and we are really aware that the multi-layered crisis that Lebanon has been facing, starting from the economic crisis, looking at the COVID-19 outbreak, but also combined with the explosion that happened last year, we know that really this has further impacted and exacerbated the existing vulnerabilities that migrants have. Particularly, we are aware that really a minority, around 22% migrants have their families or close relatives with them, which again, if we look at the support available by family is quite limited. And this was based on an assessment that also IOM has conducted between October 2020 and Feb 2021, where we also identified that around 50% of migrants were unable to find income or had their contracts ended. And this had also a lot of implications on their food security, but also on their shelter security. And this is where basically it was found out that really migrants are living in substandard shelter conditions, characterized by unsafe structures, unfortunately, and overcrowded, where they are at threat of being evicted. And in order to really cope with the situation, we have seen that migrants have been resorting to negative strategies, including reducing like educational components, but also their access to food and health expenditures. And unfortunately, we have seen that a lot of them were accepting degrading, exploitative, and dangerous or illegal work. And here I have to mention very quickly that among the caseload that IOM has been assisting, we have seen also that the vulnerability to trafficking, where migrants are being exploited, is quite high. Well, now, again, how were we trying to promote and uphold migrants' rights in order to support them really in accessing their basic needs and exercising these rights? Again, I think at the heart of what we have been so far trying to do is to enhance partnership and build partnership with different key actors, I have to say, including definitely with government agencies, but with migrants themselves, civil society organization, and other UN agencies. And this was around several pillars. I would like to really possibly stop and highlight the importance of providing migrants with direct, immediate assistance. This is what we call like really the immediate humanitarian assistance in order for migrants to be able to access food, shelter, health, and also have protection needs, also to address these protection needs in a timely manner. But another crucial component of the support was the assisted voluntary return and reintegration. While we look throughout the whole process on the safety of migrants, would it be like health or the protection risks as well, and ensuring as well the continuum of care even once they return back to their country of origin through extending access to reintegration assistance. And another part, what was also important under the direct assistance, is to make sure that we have established active and functional referral pathway, including with relevant embassies, but also with general security, like the immigration authorities, where migrants were given access to exit-free visa. So these were basically important components that we were trying to build up and support. But at the same time, there are other areas, including like training and capacity building for key actors on vulnerability screening, but also thematic guidance. And this is what we are currently busy doing and working with Ministry of Social Affairs to ensure that migrants are included in national social protection strategy. But as I mentioned earlier, convening and basically facilitating dialogue where we bring together different key actors in order to look of how can we mobilize resources, how can we build further partnership and ensure cooperation in order to assist migrants in these very difficult situation. And a crucial component of the response was for us and will remain the advocacy. And here I have to say that as part of the humanitarian response, migrants were not as included as a target group. So we worked closely with our partners from different UN agencies in order to make sure that the migrants' needs are captured and adequate responses are being put in place. So this is why, like through the emergency response plan that was developed recently this year for Lebanon, migrants was a clear target group. But again, also looking at their access to COVID-19 vaccine, which was something that was really a real inclusion, if I have to say, despite the fact if migrants are in regular or irregular situation, we succeeded with our partners to make this access a real access on the ground. So we're working with community leaders, with the diaspora who are based here in country, but also with embassies to make sure that we are basically increasing the outreach. And on the same day, in a one-stop shop, if I may say, approach, migrants come, they receive awareness on the COVID-19 vaccine. On the same day, if they are willing to get the vaccine, they are registered on the national platform and given the vaccine shot on the same day. But again, looking at the broader picture of policy reform, and given that migrants' vulnerability to trafficking is quite high, we continue on prioritizing the support that IOM extends to government and partners on the reform of the counter-trafficking law to make sure that the protection and the prevention of this crime is put forward. Now on data research and learning, and so what I have shared earlier with you, helped us very much to really improve the understanding of partners of relevant issues in order to inform programming and response. We were continuously really looking at this to make sure that we come with an evidence-based programming and approaches. Now, and this is really what is at the heart of our discussion today. I mean, how can we together join forces? We know that we have been working together to offer immediate humanitarian assistance, as well as safe, dignified return and sustainable reintegration to migrants in vulnerable situations. So IOM has been attending to the needs of migrants who are in vulnerable situation, following referral from African diaspora in the US, in Canada, in Europe, but at the same time, how can we really address the humanitarian needs and the assisted volunteer return needs through joint programming in the future. Again, the advocacy will remain an important aspect of what we can look at to ensure that migrants have access to their rights. I mean, we have been recently engaging with the African Union in order to ensure that migrants have access to timely consular support. But I will really conclude my presentation by putting forward again this question: how can we join further forces? What can we do together? Because the challenges are quite high, the needs are quite high, and one organization alone cannot take that. So cooperation and partnership is really required to make sure that we put forward our thoughts, our reflection, our expertise, our resources in order to give migrants access to their rights and to address their needs in a safely and comprehensively manner. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dima, for your presentation. I think it was very helpful to see not only the very high levels of need and the challenges that migrants face, African migrants especially face in Lebanon at the current time, but also I'm pleased that you emphasized the central point, which is no one agency can do all these things alone to meet these needs. And it therefore will require a lot of partnership working, an agile partnership working with a range of different partners from international agencies, government, and also the diaspora. And I liked as well the way that you kind of ended with posing the question, how can the African diaspora, and I say this as someone who's worked for African diaspora organizations, and this webinar series is organized in partnership with ADEPT. Which is a network of African diaspora organizations based in 30 European states. So I think this is a key question. So thank you for raising that, Dima. With no further ado, I'm going to move on to our final panelist today. Last but not least, it's Cynthia DeSantis from Healing Venezuela. It's great that we've had Cynthia able to join us today. She's a Venezuelan biologist with a master in public policy, and she had a career as environmentalist working for NGOs and international oil companies in the past. In her last post, she was head of health, safety and environment for a FTSE 100 company. Cynthia has been involved in non-profit organizations in the UK and Venezuela. And after she retired from a full-time job, she founded the organization Healing Venezuela. So it's great you're able to join us today, Cynthia. Very interested to hear your perspectives in relation to Venezuela, but also the challenges of supporting Venezuelan migrants in other countries. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to share my screen. So basically, I'm going to focus presentation on the work that we're doing and other organizations are doing in Venezuela. So rather than in other countries, it's basically the country of origin. So I just give you a quick view of what's happening in Venezuela. Venezuela, 96% of households' income is below the poverty line, and there's no surprise that the acute malnutrition in children is increasing, but not only in children, also in adults. Venezuelans need, for example, 144 times the minimum wage to access basic needs basket. And only this year, the consumer prices forecast is around 5,000% in Venezuelan currency, but also the inflation is rampant in US currency. The Venezuelan refugee crisis is the second largest in the world, only after Syria. There are 6.5 million Venezuelans spread around the world, mainly in Latin America. So what is the support that the Venezuelan diaspora is offering to the country? What are we doing, those of us who are outside Venezuela, to help our fellow citizens? Well, first of all, remittances has been the main source, the second main source of income of the country, GDP, for the last 2-3 years. A huge effort is on medical supplies, providing medical supplies, and there are some initiatives in the US, like Project for Humanitarian Help in the US, several initiatives in the EU, and Healing Venezuela in the UK. The focus is also training health professionals in the country, like Maher from SAS said before. I mean, there is a brain drain of health professionals in Venezuela. 50% of professionals have left the country. So there's a huge effort trying to keep the junior doctors training in hospitals, because they are at the forefront of the medical care for people with less resources. There is a huge initiative for food programs with an NGO called Alimenta la Solidaridad, Feed Solidarity, and Us Healing Venezuela. And again, I'm talking only about efforts from the diaspora, because large NGOs are in Venezuela, but this is mainly focused on the diaspora organizations. Awareness is absolutely vital. We do a lot of advocacy, talking in social media, but also we're present in traditional media, non-traditional media. We engage with the Parliament, the UK Parliament, and the EU universities. It's extremely important for us for the general public to be aware of what's happening in Venezuela. So I want to show you this slide because I think that can exemplify what's the crisis of Venezuela, and one of the reasons why it's so difficult for us also for people to understand. And these slides show our growth. So we basically grew in 2016. We were in one state, one hospital, actually. And in December 2021, we are now in 15 states, many more hospitals. We have branches in UK and Spain. It's all run by volunteers here in Venezuela. And actually, this shows really the demand that has so dramatically grown in this past 5 years. And our growth and the general growth of the diaspora support comes from that. Now, what are we doing specifically as Healing Venezuela to help our country? Well, first of all, as I say, we have this program of medical supplies. We collect medical supplies that are discarded by health centers in Europe and send it to Venezuela. We also buy medical supplies. We have 140 junior doctors around the country that we sponsor with a scholarship of $20 per month, that compared to $5 per month, which is their salary. You can imagine this makes a huge difference for them. We have also mental well-being programs focused on health professionals, but also children. We're very worried about the impact of the crisis in Venezuela on future generations. We have an important program of infrastructure, in the sense that we're trying to at least maintain a crumbling health infrastructure in Venezuela. In that sense, we have installed 3 water treatment plants, and we have donated 14 critical equipment, which is basically the only help that the most impoverished in Venezuela can receive is in state hospitals in Venezuela, and this is our focus. And also we have, as I said before, malnutrition programs in 2 very impoverished areas of Venezuela. Now, we are also, we realized, especially after a tragic event of the father of one of our volunteers committed suicide, we realized that actually we need to do something also for Venezuelans in the UK. So in that sense, we have organized this outfit called By Venezuelan. We associate with 40 vendors, Venezuelan entrepreneurs in the UK, from food vendors to psychologists, marketing specialists. And basically under this banner, under this initiative, we support them with their websites. They are on our website. We give them exposure on our social media, and we give them the possibility of participating in art fairs, in fairs and virtual pop-ups. The last one we had was on Sunday. And so we give them exposure in that sense in the UK. And also we have a mentorship program for entrepreneurs. We also had organized mental well-being programs for people here in the UK. And we plan to do more in the next few years. Well, the challenges are many, and I'm going to start with the first one, which is that the Venezuelan crisis is actually not seen or understood. We understand here in the UK, well, there is a cultural barrier, there is a historical gap, but also it's difficult to understand how a country that is not at war and it is so rich can be in such a deep crisis. And that's something difficult to understand, but at the same time, it's also not portrayed in the right way, in my view. The efforts from abroad are very fragmented. We are really not coherent. There's lack of efficiency between, organizations that are trying to help Venezuela, and that's really a challenge. Try to work jointly. There are still challenges on the ground for humanitarian NGOs. There is harassment, people have been detained, there's scarcity of petrol, there's scarcity of everything overall, but particularly petrol makes it very difficult for us to reach some hospitals in some areas, especially rural areas in Venezuela. The US-EU sanctions don't help at all. In fact, similar to Syria, the banks are very reluctant to open bank accounts for anything that smells like Venezuela. We have tremendous difficulties to do transactions, even to purchase medical supplies, not in Venezuela, but in America or here in Europe. Is extremely challenging and time-consuming. We really have no support from government or international bodies at all. And we have approached many, and the response has always been interesting, but not really. We don't like Venezuelan diaspora organizations because they are politicized. That's the response, one of the response that we often have. And frankly, I think that's quite lazy because many organizations are not political at all, only if they, take the time to find out. COVID-19 has been a huge challenge for us. We don't know what is the reality on the ground. We know the children and adults are being vaccinated with vaccines that have not been endorsed by the World Health Organization. So the situation has only become worse. And frankly, the last message that I have is that, yes, as Karin said, Venezuelan diaspora overseas, for us, it's existential. When the big agencies or when the international agencies or other governments will not pay attention to Venezuela, for us Venezuelans, it's going to be always important to help recover our country and to help our fellow citizens. So I really welcome this initiative from ADEP Shabaka and particularly from IOM to give us the support and the visibility that we need worldwide. And this is all I had to say.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, for your presentation. It was really inspiring again to hear about the work that Healing Venezuela and others have been doing in relation to Venezuela, even though it's obviously dispiriting for yourselves and all of us to learn about the challenges that you face. But no, really interesting, and also to hear from a Venezuelan perspective, which I think many of us will agree is kind of underrepresented and we don't hear enough about. So no, thank you. And very soon we will move to question and answer with the audience. So if you've got any questions for our panelists, please post them into the Q&A box, and then we will ask the moderators. But a massive thank you to all our panelists. For the next section of agenda, before we move to question and answer, excuse me, I'm just going to actually take two interventions from the floor. The first intervention is going to be from Dr. Sarah Abdul-Jalil, who's joined us just now. And she's able to join us for a very short amount of time because she's actually a consultant within the health service here, and she's got a few minutes before she goes back to her clinic. So if it's all right with our colleagues, I'm going to give the floor to Dr. Sarah. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul, and sorry about the technical hitch this afternoon. And I'm really privileged to be here with you and just listen to the last speaker. In regards to the humanitarian intervention from the Sudanese diaspora, I would like to mention that it has been dynamic, has been changing over years, and has been affected by several factors. So if we just take from 2017 onwards, there has been different sort of crises. For example, there was cholera outbreak, there was dengue, as well hemorrhagic fever. But then there was some issues related to crisis in relation to availability of basic medication. There is an ongoing issue with the people's need in conflict zone and in refugees camps. And Then there was the global crisis regarding the COVID-19. In between all of that, there are other factors that will determine the intervention. One of them is the political regime and the easy access and communication with stakeholders back home. In the social media, different sort of platforms, there has been very well continents, and the contribution has been changing from just donation, which is mainly, I would say, from the diaspora who are, for example, in the Gulf or Saudi Arabia, to more about advocacy and media intervention and reaching out for different international community players, for example, with the Congress or the Parliament or other civic societies in different parts of the world. There has been as well a connection between the diaspora themselves. And one of the examples was the coalition between the doctors in regard to the COVID-19. This office included doctors from North America, from Australia, from Europe, from the Gulf. And we were all working together to try help the government to handle the outbreak of COVID-19, in particular with PPEs and with oxygen cylinders. But as well, there was a lot of contribution about increasing awareness of the public and advice regarding using masks, washing hands, and then about the vaccine uptake. I would say that currently every 2 or 3 days there are peaceful protests in Sudan, not only in Khartoum. And these peaceful protests have been faced by a very brutal human rights violation. And the diaspora have been again engaged in donating money to provide the first aid kit, to provide training, working with other stakeholders, and availability of resuscitation or pre-hospital care. And there are challenges even inside the hospital. So I'll say it's a long journey, and we have learned from each other to the table, whether it is campaigners mobilizing the communities, or whether they're health professionals, or whether they are lawyers in regard to the human rights violation. And people have been all engaged. And this was the, I think, the strength of most of the mobilization and the success stories. I'd like to conclude by saying a very successful story. It's when we worked with Shabaka social enterprise in 2017, and we trained the teachers in the White Lion in Sudan about how to early identify cholera and how to try to intervene, and sort of supporting this infrastructure. In 2020, when there was an outbreak, this group of trained school teachers actually were able immediately to mobilize the community and to report and to start action in regards to controlling cholera outbreak. And we had a feedback from, at that time, the Minister of Health, previous Minister of Health, that that was really helpful. I will end here, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zara, and we greatly appreciate you taking time out of your incredibly busy working day, dealing with very sick children, to speak to us. Before we move on to the next intervention from the floor, because there's a colleague from Restless Beings, Mabroor, I think he's nearly ready to speak, he's been on the move. I was just going to remind you, please put your questions into the Q&A box. for our panelists, including for Dr. Sara, who you've just heard. She should be available for just a couple more minutes, and also for Mabroor Ahmed, who will be joining us shortly. But if it's okay with everyone here, I propose I'm going to start asking questions of our panelists. So the first question that's come through is, in what ways do you think that humanitarian aid delivered by diaspora humanitarian organizations will improve downward accountability? And how do locals think about the diaspora's efforts in providing aid? And I'm going to put this question to each of our panelists in turn now. Dr. Azzouz, is it all right if I start with you?
Yes. So let me start by answering the second part. Obviously, the acceptance of the local community, of the diaspora and the international community is the challenge. We assume that we're coming and they're going to welcome us in open arms. Well, that's not always the case, whether it is for the diaspora organizations or the international community, because there is this, unfortunately, inherent mistrust in the international community when it comes to deprived communities or communities of conflict. And that's where the diaspora, even though it faces that challenge, but can assist the international community in bridging that gap, in adding to the transparency and to the credibility of the international community operation. But that also has to be accompanied by transparency and a little more efficient and fluent operation from the international community so that that gap can be bridged.
Thank you, Doctor, for your answer. If it's okay with you, Dima, I'm going to ask you exactly the same question to get your perspective on this key issue of accountability in the humanitarian space.
Thank you, Paul. And actually, just allow me to appreciate the work that colleagues have just presented. Maher, Cynthia, and Dr. Sara. Really, it's promising to see that there are rooms for us, despite the challenges, to really create a certain pathway on way forward. But again, I mean, I think you're touching upon a very crucial point. How are we engaging with crisis-affected people? Because we know that they are fragile. We know that they are in need of humanitarian assistance. And we know, unfortunately, that this opens up a lot of challenges when it comes to accountability. So how are we really giving them enough awareness to know that this is their right in a way? Another point is to look at really having in place mechanism in case they would like to report any fraud, any abuse, that they can also approach these kind of structures and that these structures are safe. I mean, this is not something that is easy, but this is also something that when we are looking really at building up the humanitarian response, it's something that is very crucial to take that into consideration. I mean, and this is, as I said, like it requires awareness, it requires training, but it also requires a certain systems to ensure that the accountability for affected population is taken into consideration. But yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Dima. You make some very important points there. And Cynthia, if it's okay, I'm going to ask you for your opinion on this question. I'll preface it as well by noting, as we've discussed many times before, how there are perhaps particular challenges for diaspora communities where in countries of origin or settlement, there are distrustful relationships between the diaspora and governments. So Cynthia, do you have any reflections on this point?
I'll start with the easy bit, which is about our relationship with people that are with the people in Venezuela. And at this stage of our work, we have only received a lot of gratitude and a lot of very welcome. Our support has been extremely welcome by all the direct beneficiaries, but also with, for example, hospital directors who are appointed by the regime and the regime loyalists. We have very, let's say, smooth relationships because they know that we don't have a political agenda. There is no exchange of money. There is no chance for corruption whatsoever. So for us, it's been extremely easy to work, especially with the direct beneficiaries, but also little by little has become very easy to work with hospitals and with, let's say, political actors. So in that sense, so far, it's a good story. Now, in terms of accountability and in terms of transparency, because Venezuela has such a terrible reputation, we put double effort in transparency and in accountability. Just to give you an example of transparency, the Charity Commission requires us to report once a year. We report twice a year. We give quarterly updates of what we do. We're extremely open about our finances, okay? In terms of, for example, on the ground, we used to help 40 health centers. Of those initial 40 health centers, only 6 have remained because they haven't, the other 34 haven't showed the level of accountabilities that we were looking for. So that's, to us, it's very challenging, and we put a lot of effort on that.
Apologies, I'm muted, and thank you, Cynthia, for your answer. If it's okay with everyone, I'm actually going to try and ask the same question to Dr. Sara before she has to jump into her clinic. Dr. Sara, are you still there?
Yes.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
I think these are very important points regarding to the governance of the engagement of the diaspora. And one of the ways to deal with it is, I think, having associations that are very transparent and very clear about their vision and their objectives, and they are monitored by the, by their own governance structure. But another important factor is the communication between the diaspora and those on the ground back home. I don't know whether you can hear me very well. And I think it's important not to support the needs of the people in back home and address that. It has to be a bi-directional, mutual relationship. And to build the trust, I think transparency and showing accountability is important, especially when we come to the issue about donation and about addressing how this money will be distributed and what is the outcome and what is the impact. So if people can see the impact and can see the outcome, that will build trust. The last thing I would like to say that we have seen is we see the challenges between the diaspora and the government, whether the government is supportive of the diaspora or the other way around. And that would make a huge difference because that would facilitate the communication and the connection, rather than if you have a government that is not supportive to the diaspora engagement and complicating their intervention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sara, and thanks once again for being able to take time out from your busy day in clinic to join us today. I think your contributions were extremely valuable. And also thank you to Mabroor, who I can see has joined us now. And if it's okay, I'd like to hand over the floor to you, Mabroor, to give your perspectives.
Thank you very much, firstly, for biding your time with me. I know I've been a little bit rushed and probably missed my session start time. And also very much thank you to IOM and to ADEPT as well for creating this platform for an important discussion. Very briefly, I am one of the directors of an organization called Restless Beings, and we're a human rights organization, but also kind of double up as a humanitarian response organization as well. And so my very brief thoughts this afternoon or this morning, wherever you are in the world, will be from the perspective more from a human rights angle and as an activist, if you like. Obviously, when it comes to humanitarian response, and when we're talking about diaspora-led organizations, for the most part, and I think Dr. Azuz kind of referenced this when he spoke as well. For the most part, it's a diaspora working for a community of the originating country. Our work has mostly not been in that shape or form. One of our projects that we work with extensively, probably our headline project, for example, is the Rohingya community. I'm not of Rohingya heritage, I'm of Bangladeshi heritage. and even before the Rohingya found themselves in Bangladesh, in the largest refugee camp in the world right now, when they were in diaspora, whether that was in Malaysia or Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, India, or even here in the UK, our work was to support them from a humanitarian response perspective, but also from a human rights perspective in terms of advocacy on a political level, as well as on an academic and media level. Similarly, right now, another one of our projects is working with the Tigray genocide in Ethiopia. And again, in our organization, we don't have anyone from Ethiopian diaspora or Tigrayan diaspora at all. And I think that's one of our models, if you like, that we've tried to implement throughout the organization, which is it's not necessarily just from being from a diaspora background, which means that you would then stand up, if you like, as an activist, or respond, if you like, as a humanitarian to a need of your own community, but actually to imagine a world where we are diasporas of every country. We take that word to mean as if we are one of a community of humans across the world, as opposed to of nationalities and identity shaped by borders and systems and ecosystems, which are recent inventions, if you like, in the history of mankind. But to take more of a spirit of brothers in arms of one another in humanitarianism, as opposed to humanitarian. And I suppose that's really our force majeure, if you like. That's the way that we operate. It's our key unique selling point as well, if you like. How that transforms communities is very clear and very simple. For example, if we look at the Tigrayan genocide, of course there is a considerable Tigrayan population here in the UK. It's of immense pleasure to that community and a message of support that an organization which doesn't have any direct links to Tigray or to Ethiopia is willing to stand alongside them and fight on a human rights perspective, but also be ready on a humanitarian perspective. Similarly for the Rohingya, we have been an organization which has supported the Rohingya through their various waves of genocide and atrocity crimes that they faced, despite not having a Rohingya person who sits on our board, but to be able to represent and to be able to work alongside and to really listen. And I think that's the key element, to have a listening ear and to train a listening ear, such that we don't then take on a diaspora's woes, pleas, or desires, and then kind of transform them into a model which we understand in the West, but really to truly to listen to what a community needs, wants, and to try and represent that to the best of our ability. And one of the big things that we do in terms of representation, and I suppose it's kind of a hark towards Western privilege, if you like, of being an organization based in London, the so-called International Human Rights Organization based in London, is we use that tagline, that title, if you like, to try and fight for elbow space, whether that's on an academic conference, whether that's on an advocacy level, whether that's an invitation to the UK House of Parliament, House of Congress in the US. And the moment that we get there, the very first thing that we do is we say, well, welcome on board our Rohingya brothers and sisters, and welcome on board our Tigrayan brothers and sisters, and immediately kind of rescind our title and our role and give that platform to the people who need to be heard more. As much as we might be educated and as much as we might have experience in the field, for us, our big our big motivation is to get the voice of diaspora communities heard in places where otherwise they might find it very difficult. And then if we're the platform and the conduit for that, then and if that's our role, then we're very happy with that. I think on a humanitarian perspective as well, just to kind of follow up what I've mentioned on the human rights perspective, one of our key ingredients is to really place ourselves as a small organization. That means that we're able to maneuver quite quickly and quite rapidly, deploy quite quickly and rapidly, work with local markets as opposed to international markets, to try and overcome. I think almost every speaker mentioned this, that there is difficulty in getting money across to especially conflict zones, but even non-conflict zones where communities are suffering. kind of overcome those. We work on a local basis, on a small scale basis, and then really what our main tool that we do from there onwards is whatever we have seen on a humanitarian response, or whatever we've learned on a humanitarian response, is to bring that back to the platforms that we might have, whether that's on a political level, an academic level, or on a media level. And that's really the connect between the two sides of our work of human rights and humanitarian response. And I hope that in a few quick minutes I've been able to adequately portray the scale of our organization. Of course, we have many difficulties. One of our big difficulties is we've never taken any corporate funding or government funding to do our work, and that in itself is a huge challenge in being able to do some of this work on sometimes limited, but most often non-existing budgets. And you know, we've been going for 15 years and really from the goodwill of supporters and diaspora communities, and that cannot be understated at all. And I think I'll leave it there and wait for any questions that may come along. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mabrur, for your intervention. I think it was great to learn more about the work that Restless Beings is doing. And I think you've encapsulated really neatly the multi-dimensional nature of a lot of diaspora transnational activity. I think it's really important that we step out of this kind of binary view where diaspora have a single settlement country and a single origin country, and that's the sole axis or pole through which they act, when, as we've heard from Mabrur, but also our other speakers today, it's actually a lot more complex. It's a lot more interesting in many ways. It's more dynamic, it's more multi-layered, and as I say, multi-dimensional. But Mabrur, you also kind of made me think as well, what do we need to do to raise awareness and increase recognition of how the diaspora are responding to crises in other countries? We might say third countries, it might be transit countries, depending on the context. I mean, maybe I can pick on you to give your view very briefly, Mabrur, on that particular question, and then I'll ask it to the other panelists too.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point that you make, especially the idea of transit countries, because I think, you know, when communities are moving and they're about to go from being in their country to being a diaspora community, transit countries play a huge role. Look, I think, you know, kind of harking back to a little bit of what I said earlier, just a few moments ago, I understand the need for terms like diaspora, but I also see how they can be of certain, they carry certain ramifications and labels which are not always that helpful. And I think that's also very important, because when a community moves, or when a person from a community moves from a country, it's only really because they absolutely have to, right? So when they absolutely have to move, then they're not necessarily going to go to the third country and be absolutely adamant that they're going to expect and want everything that they had at home. It is an opportunity in many cases when people are running away from atrocities or from natural disasters of a chance and opportunity to start afresh. And by starting afresh, at that moment, to be labeled a diaspora member isn't as helpful as to be just recognized as a member of society. And I think, you know, it's a little bit idealistic. I'm well aware of the idealism in what I'm saying, but I think sometimes we need to have a little bit of idealism as well. I know that's a kind of roundabout way of answering the question. In a sense, it's from my perspective. You know, the difficulty of diaspora communities I'm sure I'm not going to be the best person to talk about the difficulty of diaspora communities and what we can better do to support them. But one of the things that I would say, from my perspective, from Restless Beings' perspective, is to say that sometimes let's not always label them as diaspora communities. Let's just recognize them as members of new members of a society that we all coexist and live alongside. And I suppose sometimes when we do that, some of the hurtful nature, some of the xenophobic nature that we might sometimes have in society could potentially be eradicated. And like I said, I know I'm saying this with a big fat dollop of idealism, and that's the nature of our organization. We're idealistic, we have hope. We fight with our fists up, but most often with our arms open, because I think that's probably the best way that we can stop pushing each other further to the margins. I don't know if I've answered your question, Paul. I really hope that I have.
No, thank you, Mabrur. You have, and I very much appreciate too the call to remain kind of idealistic, if not optimistic, and to not lose that sense of idealism. If it's okay, I want to pose this or a similar question to our panel speakers. Maybe I could start with you, Dr. Azuz, in terms of how can we increase recognition of diaspora activities in, let's call them, third countries, and what recommendations would you make for institutional partners to strengthen their engagement with diaspora humanitarians?
Well, I need an hour to answer that question. But let me try and do it in a minute. Just to carry on what Mabrur was saying, I'm not sure. I mean, I understand the issue of being labeled as a diaspora, how that brings up certain animosities, sometimes certain perceptions, whether political or economic. But at the same time, this is the strength of recognizing the strength of that community cannot be without a label. So being labeled as diaspora is not the problem. The problem is in the perception of what the diaspora is, and that's what we need to focus on. But to answer your question on, I think to be specific, I'll give the example from SAM's standpoint. If we as SAMs, as a diaspora-led organization, as members, who, by the way, are not only focused on the Syrian crisis, we operate in different areas, serving Syrians and non-Syrians, and we also operate in the US, and we participate in emergency responses around the world. So being a diaspora with focus does not mean that you do not do other things, and that's an important thing for maintaining credibility and neutrality. But when it comes to the international community, as SAMs, if we knew 10 years ago when we started what we know now, we would have been a lot more efficient. It was a very hard learning process, and the international community lacks the platforms for helping diaspora-led organizations or even grass or civil society-led organizations to be able to be a lot more efficient. We had to learn the hard way as diaspora who are not trained. I mean, I'm not trained in humanitarian work, but we had to do this with our, but there were no guidelines. There was no book for NGOs for dummies. So the international community is something like IOM providing a platform for supporting, encouraging, and showing the way so that what we learned in 5 years, other organizations and other conflict zones can learn in a year, can go a long way. There is this issue of looking at diaspora NGOs as we are kind of stepping into a field that's not ours. We are like little. So a mutual respect sometimes can also help recognizing the roles. And that goes both ways. I know that sometimes diaspora NGOs or the kind of civil society organizations think they know it all, and they really don't. We learned the wrong way. We struggle with the local civil society organizations and the local organizations in documentation so that we can provide transparency. So as the second point is the international community really needs to focus on supporting educational efforts to maintain human capacity within those migrant communities in their host countries, in their native countries, and then in the West. For example, universities across the world need to have specific seats for these migrants to maintain, need to support educational activities within the host countries. The host countries they're usually from the same region, so they have the same economic issues. They do not have the capacity to accept an additional 20, 30, 40% trainees or students within their communities. And that's where the international community can support this. But I would say that probably the most important thing, especially in the post-COVID era now, is for the international community to look back at its efficiency and transparency in the way it delivers services. Why is there this perceived bias of waste and inefficiency within the international system? And the last thing is really defining humanitarian neutrality. And that's a that's a very big topic, and that's probably one of the major sources for the distrust that sometimes the migrant or even diaspora communities have towards the international community. So working on the image and the perception may be something that's overview. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Azzouz, for your very considered answer. And in a sense, you've kind of opened up the field. We could spend hours talking about some of the points you've raised, especially when it comes to the fitness of the humanitarian system globally in the 21st century. Is it still fit for purpose? There's a lively debate within the sector about this, and also about how suitable are key tenets of the humanitarian sector, such as humanitarian principles and neutrality, when these are increasingly becoming contested notions within the sector itself. And maybe we can feed some of the discussions into the next webinar of the series. So thank you. If it's okay with you, Dima, I'll ask Cynthia the same question first from a diaspora perspective, and then maybe you can provide an answer to the question from an institutional perspective. So Cynthia, what are your thoughts on this question? How can diaspora efforts, especially in other countries, be better recognized? And what recommendations would you make to institutional partners to achieve more impact in this regard?
I think that governance, to have a robust and transparent governance system is extremely important. And in our case, I mean, I didn't have any training either in humanitarian efforts, but what I tried to do is to transfer my knowledge from, let's say, the oil industry, which is quite strict, into the setup of the charity, because that's the best way that I know of setting up a high level of transparency and governance in an organization. I'm not saying by any way that it's the best, but actually, to me, strong governance and transparency are absolutely critical to receive recognition, and also networking. It's very, very important. So our performance basically talks of our of who we are. It's hard work, as Dr. Azzouz was saying, extremely hard work, a lot of work to get recognition, and little by little we have been recognized. So we even received some prizes, one for transparency, the other were shortlisted. I mean, we try to do whatever we can to receive, to be accepted as a serious organization. We work with other diaspora because I think anybody who is a forced immigrant understands and feels the pain of being outside your country and what it means for people like the Rohingyas, and such, to the Syrians and so on. So, but it's very hard for us to split our, let's say, our efforts with all the diasporas too. So we need to focus. I think that what IOM is doing is absolutely vital. As I say, we've tried, we knocked at the doors of many international institutions and organizations, and only the IOM has been so far, willing to organize us. And I think it's extremely important that they help us to set the tone, to set the standards, the coordination efforts, to be our voice with other international organizations, to give us the skills. So there is a role, like a little bit of a mentoring or like midwifery role that I foresee, IOM doing, because I cannot speak for the others. It's only IOM that has shown any interest in doing this very, very important work.
Well, thank you, Cynthia, and for making the very important point about IOM's active support in this area over the years. Maybe this is a timely point to bring you in, Dima, for your perspectives on this question, and also to hear a couple of recommendations from yourself about how we can address this moving forward.
Well, I can't agree more with colleagues Cynthia, Dr. Maher, and Ahmed. I think again, the platform and this kind of webinar that we are having is a clear recognition from Shabaka, ADEPT, and IOM that there is a key role that the diaspora is playing when it comes to really supporting and responding to several humanitarian crises. So first is this, this is already behind us. Now, moving forward, I think Dr. Azzouz started to put forward, and Cynthia complement that. What do we need? How can we, from our side, support these efforts? one in terms of like bringing expertise together between the different, diaspora to exchange possibly about challenges, but about opportunities that they were able to create. Second, again, I mean, if we look together at the role of diaspora, but particularly zooming into humanitarian response, I mean, Dr. Azu said, he said, like, maybe I'm a doctor, I'm an expert. We have the will, but I mean, can someone really support us in this particular field that will also require, I mean, tailored responses? So I think, I mean, to add into what Cynthia has just mentioned, like coordination and facilitating dialogue, and this could be at different levels. It could be at the global level, but I mean, we're more than happy to look at how can we work together with our different counterpart at the country level. And here with SAMS, I have to say, IOM is coming together on the ground to discuss different areas of cooperation and coordination. It's the same with the network of African communities and African diaspora in Lebanon who are still facing a lot of challenges to operate. So, I mean, definitely we have the global perspective, but we can come, I have to say, closer at country levels, at looking at particular responses. How can we and who can do what kind of technical support IOM can provide, but also how can we further enhance collaboration and coordination, especially, I mean, in line with the challenges that the diaspora has been facing. I mean, to have a trustworthy organization that is also trusted by the government, trusted by partners, who can open up doors for the diaspora. And I mean, again, we believe of the added value of the diaspora, and we want others to see this added value. And I think we are committed to that as IOM, because we are present in the humanitarian response, but we are also, we know the skills, we know the potential, we know the enthusiasm that the diaspora, it's simply we will be missing the opportunity if we don't really give them the space and listen to them, hear from them and support them as much as we can in the different areas, as I said. I mean, it will require, I have to say, further reflection to build up particular responses or particular programming, if I may say, because so far and sometimes we tend to be anecdotal with the way how we look at it. So let's move on from the anecdotal approaches to build up possibly joint programming where we really look at the potential that we have within the diaspora, look at the areas of expertise that IOM has, and come up, I mean, not only IOM, but we can also map who are the key actors and come up with clear programming with outcomes. I mean, I also heard Dr. Sarah mentioning the outcome level results that, are also important because we show the impact of what we are doing. Sorry if I was long, but I can't agree more with you, Dr. Aziz, Cynthia, and Mabroor. Because, I mean, when we are also looking at the humanitarian response, we have the human rights that we need to keep and the due diligence to really our affected population that we really need to look at. Thank you, and I'm sorry, but it's simply it's too much to really not react to your words, Dr. Azu, Cynthia, and again Ahmed and Dr. Sarah. Thank you very much for all the hard work that you have been doing and joining forces. Again, I will complete with these 2 words.
Thank you so much, Dima. And likewise, I've been both inspired and also touched by the presentations we've heard today. I think that clearly there are needs around building trust and confidence, but also very real opportunities and very good examples of good practice. And it's great to learn more about IOM's kind of leadership in this regard with sort of amongst institutional partners. And we look forward to taking forward these discussions, both in the next series of this webinar, but also as part of joint working. And it was music to my ears too, Dima, about the need to strengthen the kind of evidence base, if you like. But I'm very mindful that time is against us. We're in risk of running over slightly. So with no further ado, I wanted to thank all our amazing panelists today and our contributors. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague Bashir Ahmed, who will make closing remarks. Thank you.
No, thank you. I actually don't have much to add. Just wanted to thank you all our amazing panelists. and also for the audience for taking part in this really important discussion. And I think this is where we kind of like having these kind of spaces is so critical, and also kind of speaks where we're actually doing this webinar series in partnerships with ADEPT and with IOM is testament to how we're actually trying to work out what kind of conversations we need to do, and just kind of started to hear the voice and actually then move from from the academic or the discussions to the programmatic engagement that can take place and cross-learning. There's a lot of emphasis of institutional actors teaching diasporas, but I think there's also a lot of learning from diasporas that, for institutional actors in terms of the practicalities and the challenges and how that can be facilitated. I was busy writing a lot of notes, and I wanted to go into a lot of details, but I wanted to say, let's not think of this as a kind of last conversation. Let's kind of continue these discussions. We will be returning again for the final of the series in January, where we're going to look at motivations. And I think this is going to be really interesting to kind of what drives the diasporas. And also just to kind of show and highlight when diaspora are engaged, it's becoming a lot more sophisticated. It's not just about donating a little bit here. It's about, advocacy. It's about engaging with communities at different levels. Kind of just seeing the bigger picture, what drives it, and also looking at it intergenerationally. But for the meantime, I just wanted to wish you all a great day ahead if you are in the, depending where you are in the world, or great evening. And yes, we look forward to continuing to that. And I believe there's going to be a recording of this going to be provided for participants. But again, thank you all for your time and for your contributions. And we look forward to continuing quite a lot of these discussions further on. Have a good afternoon and evening and morning. Thank you, everyone.